Hello, I'm Dr. Sam, this is Dr. Sam's Health, and today, as promised, I'm going to talk about the standard American diet, also known as the Western pattern diet or the Western diet. I actually prefer the term standard American diet because it abbreviates into SAD or SAD, and this term actually reflects really well the way I think about this diet. On a more serious note, these terms are pretty much interchangeable, and the standard American diet effectively is a localized version of the Western diet. And since we're talking about the local features of the Western diet, I must say that this diet actually varies depending on the region. Each region has its own climate, its own culture, its own traditions, so the composition of macronutrients, the approaches to food consumption and production will differ from area to area, but at the same time the pattern will be very similar across the Western Hemisphere. There also seems to be a noticeable change in this nutritional pattern over time. So in combination, since this pattern changes over time and across cultures and different places, it is actually very difficult to define this diet from the scientific standpoint. Accordingly, there is not too much research that would specifically refer to the standard American diet or the Western diet. I've done my search, and on PubMed I could find only 3 articles with standard American diet in the title, or less than 400 articles with the Western diet in the title, which is way lower than I would expect. Actually, we've got such a wealth of nutritional research these days, like hundreds of thousands of articles dedicated to nutrition, and only such a small fraction of them is specifically talking about the standard American diet or the Western diet. Nevertheless, there were quite a few interesting research articles that I found very helpful and very informative, and they provided a very nice overview of the development of this diet or dietary pattern and its implications on our health. Since I'm a researcher and a scientific writer, I always reference good evidence in my blogs. So as always, there will be a blog corresponding to this video. You can check it out on my website, drsamshealth.com. I will add the link below, and this blog will contain all the scientific references that I'm using in this particular video. So now, when we have covered the main housekeeping items, let's get to the essence of this video and let's talk about the diet. Specifically, I would like to talk about its origins. Actually, the reason why I want to talk about this diet so much, and specifically about its origins, is the fact that this diet reflects our evolution as a species in the past 10-15,000 years. I think it's safe to say that this diet originated approximately 10-11,000 years ago when we started to use agriculture and farming. So prior to that, we were hunters, gatherers, and we relied upon our physical prowess, on our luck, on our ability to find, catch food somewhere in the wilderness. And approximately 10-11,000 years ago, we actually started to develop agriculture and farming, and accordingly we started to gradually create this source of food that would be steady, that would require less energy, would become effectively much more cost effective, meaning that we would not have to spend some extreme amounts of energy to catch or find our food. We would just make sure that it grows or develops in certain areas, and we would create and cultivate these food sources. Most importantly, these food sources will become very steady, very reliable, and very cost effective. So we would get a very high yield eventually from our farming techniques compared to our regular hunting-gathering techniques. In addition to that, there were quite a few new developments. First of all, over the course of millennia, we have acquired, cultivated, developed new species of both animals and plants that we could domesticate or farm, and in the end of the day, we have acquired a number of new foods that were quite new to us as to a species. For example, potatoes. They were not available to Europeans until the discovery of Americas. In addition to that, we have developed new progressive techniques of farming, transportation, preservation of food, food processing, management, and so on, so that at present time, or at least in the past several decades, we could get access to pretty much any kind of foods at any time of the day and any season, and at a pretty low cost. And all these developments led to a specific pattern of nutrition, which we call the Western diet. So what are the foods and the features of the Western diet? Well, first of all, it's the cornucopia of different foods that allows us to be in a constant caloric surplus, which essentially leads to the epidemic of obesity in the Western world. We can have all kinds of animal and plant-based foods all year round, and also there is a tendency of, first of all, snacking, meaning that we can have multiple frequent meals throughout the day, and second thing is eating out. So we often eat in some restaurants or fast food chains, and usually these chains and restaurants, they're trying to present food in a very attractive way, provide us with large portions that also increase the amounts of calories and nutrients we consume. And of course, there is an abundance of foods that are not completely natural to us. Foods that 10, 15, 20,000 years ago were either completely unavailable or very, very scarce. To give you several examples, I would mention grains. I would mention starchy vegetables such as, for example, potatoes. Again, they are not common to European gut. We have milk and dairy products, which were not a typical source of nutrition for a caveman. Also, we have all kinds of different fats. Specifically, when I'm comparing fats, wild animals, they don't have much fat, especially if we're talking about all the year round. Domesticated animals, they are held in captivity, they are properly fed, they are not very stressed there, so they tend to gain a lot of fat that we consume when we harvest the organs and tissues of these animals. There are also other things such as vegetable oils, margarine, added sugars, sweeteners, carbonated drinks, and all these things that make our Western diet so unique and so special. Finally, in order to properly describe a diet, specifically the Western diet here, we have to describe its macro and micronutrient content. There were quite a few epidemiological studies that tried to describe the nutritional patterns of Americans, for example, and we'll try to summarize their findings. First of all, the macronutrients, it looks like an average American gets 50% of their energy from carbohydrates, approximately 33% of their energy intake from fat, and 15% from protein, which surprisingly is completely consistent with the 2005 nutritional guidelines. Even the average amount of cholesterol consumed is less than 300 milligrams per day, which is again consistent with the nutritional guidelines. And just to wrap up the discussion of the nutritional composition of the Western diet, a couple of other facts or nutrients that we have to cover. First of all, we know for sure that an average American consumes approximately half of the amount of fiber they should consume, half of the amount of potassium, and usually too much sodium, approximately like 49-50% over the recommended amount. So now when we know the origins of the Western diet, its composition in terms of the food that we consume, the macro and micronutrients that we consume, we can talk about the effects this diet has on our health. To put things bluntly, the Western diet is implicated in multiple conditions that are collectively known as the diseases of civilization. In general, I agree with the statement wholeheartedly, but there is a twist. It looks like the way I understand the effects of this diet on our health is very different from the way that I would say the mainstream nutritional researchers and people who are developing these guidelines are perceiving the risks and issues associated with this diet. I will definitely talk about these differences in my future videos, so please subscribe and follow my YouTube channel and my website, drsamshealth.com. Today, I would like to focus on a couple major issues that I think there are key problems of the Western diet that lead to multiple health issues in modern civilization. In my opinion, the core issue of the Western diet is the abundance of foods. They are readily available, we are consuming too many meals per day, these meals are too large, too calorically dense, we are in a chronic caloric surplus, and we are consuming too many nutrients. Our body tends to store these nutrients for worse days, and essentially this chronic caloric surplus leads to an epidemic of obesity that we're observing these days. The second core issue is the consumption of foods that we're not meant to be consuming. I specifically would like to mention carbohydrates because I don't think that a typical caveman or a person from Paleolithic era would be consuming so many carbohydrates, specifically refined ones. There is a strong insulin response to consumption of carbohydrates. They are very easy sources of energy for our body to process and to use, and When we're hooked up on carbohydrates, our body, our metabolism changes in such a way that leads to development of atherosclerosis, type 2 diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, and a number of other different issues. In addition to that, the modern research indicates that there are very strong links between the Western diet and a number of different health issues, such as changes in gut microbiome and the way we process the foods in our gut, inflammatory diseases, autoimmune diseases, cardiovascular problems, dementia, cognition, changes in our cognitive abilities, cancers and neoplasms, and so on and so on and so on. There's a pretty long list of conditions that I would like to talk about, but I just don't want to spend too much time on that today in this video. I will definitely focus on some of these conditions, the most prominent ones, and I will talk about them in my future videos. Meanwhile, I would like to ask ourselves a question whether it is a good diet or not. I mean, if we are talking about this diet, there are so many issues associated with this diet. How come that we are still eating this way? Well, with all this negativity associated with the Western diet, we must admit that this is the nutritional pattern that has evolved along with our civilization. And that is the nutritional pattern that allowed us to thrive. If we take an honest look at our modern civilization, we'll realize that our population is effectively the largest ever, our lifespan is the longest ever, and effectively we can have any foods that we want and that we like at very low cost, and we can satisfy all kinds of nutritional needs at this particular point of time. On the other hand, in the past couple of decades, we just began to understand that there are multiple issues with the Western diet, with the way we're eating these days, and there is definitely a need in more research and more discussion. And that is the reason I started this series. There will be much more videos that will be dedicated to different diets. We'll talk about the pre-agricultural diets, such as paleo, for example. We'll talk about the nutritional guidelines. We'll talk about the different forms of weight loss diets. We'll talk about low-carb diets, low-calorie diets, low-fat diets, and so on, and so on, and so on. So I'll be wrapping up this video right now, but I promise you there will be much more information. So in order not to miss a thing, subscribe to my channel, hit the like button, hit the bell button. Check out my website, drsamshealth.com. As I mentioned earlier, there will be a blog there corresponding to this video and to other videos, and with each blog there will be much more information that I can present in a video format. So if you have any questions or any suggestions, feel free to make a comment on YouTube video, on my website, approach me in any way possible. I'm always happy to interact with my viewers and readers, and that's it for today. I hope it was interesting, and I will see you in my next video. All the best.